In 1959, science fiction writer Daniel Keyes published a short story titled Flowers for Algernon, which was later expanded into a full-length novel and produced as a feature film in 1968. The tale is told through the journal entries of the central character, Charlie Gordon, who is the subject of an experimental operation that triples his IQ of 68 to over 200. Tragically, the effects turn out to be temporary, and Charlie is forced to endure a torturous reversal of his mental capacities. Not everything goes back to the way it was before, though. Some aspects of Charlie's world are irrevocably altered. When we first meet Charlie through his writing, his sentences are stilted, with a little punctuation and simple words misspelled. He struggles to grasp what others around him do and say. He cannot be brought to understand how to perform a Rorschach or ink blot test, or why he is supposed to imagine a story to go with the picture he is shown. I told her, "How can you tell stories about people you never met?" Charlie writes. Despite his limitations, Charlie does have a deeper understanding about himself and his position in society. He's painfully aware of his intellectual inadequacy, and how this keeps him from participating in so much of the world around him. Long before his operation, Charlie enrolls in an adult education program because, as he says, "All my life I wanted to be smart and not dumb." There's an isolation expressed in Charlie's desire to become smarter. He doesn't do it to gain wealth, power, or any other advantage. He sees education as an entry to society, a way to bridge the gulf he feels between himself and others. Even before his rise, he articulates his motivations quite clearly when he writes, "If the operation works, I'll be able to read better and spell the words good and know lots of things and be like other people. I want to be smart like other people." As Charlie does slowly start to understand the world, however, he finds out that his formula of intelligence equals acceptance does not exactly work. He's enthralled by his studies, sometimes over-exuberant in his efforts to apply his newfound knowledge. But almost immediately this puts a strain on his relationships with others. The first notes of disquiet come, quite dramatically, when Charlie realizes that his co-workers at the factory where he works as a janitor are not, as he had formerly thought, his best friends. After tricking him into getting drunk at a party, his co-workers set him up to dance with one of the girls there, and then continually trip him just to laugh at him. This revelation is devastating for Charlie. He feels ashamed for the first time, and deserted. He describes the feeling by saying, "Inside my chest it feels empty, like getting punched and a heartburn at the same time." This first existential crisis is only a preview of things to come. As Charlie's intelligence grows to genius levels, he starts seeing those around him differently. He notices the petty foibles of the doctors working with him, and marvels that they can't read more than a few languages. Soon he grows so far beyond the capacities of those he knows that, ironically, he's as unable to communicate as he was before the operation. His closest relationship is that with his teacher, Miss Kinnian, but he has surpassed her usefulness to him, and when he tries to recast himself as a friend, she can't understand him. "I tried to avoid all discussions of intellectual concepts and to keep the conversation on a simple, everyday level," he writes. "But she just stared at me blankly and asked me what I meant about the mathematical variance equivalent in Doberman's Fifth Concerto. A new kind of isolation sets in. I find that I don't communicate with people much anymore," he writes. "Thank God for books and music and things I can think about." At about this time, the white lab mouse Algernon, who has had the same operation as Charlie, begins to deteriorate. Algernon, like a canary in a coal mine, also marks the beginning of the end for Charlie. He scrambles to confirm the research of the doctors, but ends up by refuting their methods and proving his own impending decline. In this clip from the film, we see Charlie working on the research when the first pang of forgetfulness hits him.
Simulating brain damage, comparing homologous lesions in the tissue of animals and corresponding course.
Charlie's fall is precipitous and much more painful than his rise. He shuts everyone else out and writes of suicide. "I won't let it happen," he says. "I'll fight it. I can't help thinking of the blank expression, the silly smile, the people laughing. No, please, not that again." Finally, Charlie returns to baseline. However, not everything goes back to the way it was. He retains some of what he has learned about himself and how others think of him, and he can't stand it. "That's why I'm going away from New York for good," he writes in his final entry. "I don't want Miss Kinnian to feel sorry for me. Everybody feels sorry at the factory, and I don't want that either, so I'm going someplace where nobody knows that Charlie Gordon was once a genius, and now he can't even read a book or write good." Flowers for Algernon is a tale about the struggle of a man to overcome his handicap and become an accepted member of society, as well as the failed promise of science to deliver that wish. Daniel Keyes couldn't have known it when he wrote the story, but a decade later, a group of unusual patients at an institution in New York would experience a rise and fall that was at once altogether different and yet strikingly similar in character to Charlie's own story. To understand what happened to these people, we have to go back to the 1910s, around the time of World War I. The worst flu pandemic in history swept across the world, killing at least as many people as died in both world wars. The flu, while terrible in its own way, overshadowed a far more sinister disease that was also surging through the population. This disease, called encephalitis lethargica, or sleeping sickness, was characterized by some of the same symptoms as the flu, with one unique trait. People who had it would often sleep for days or weeks on end, unable to be roused. A third of the people who caught it died, but because the war and the flu were so much more visible, most people promptly forgot about encephalitis lethargica when it subsided. In the 1920s and 30s, though, something strange started to happen to the survivors of this disease. They developed severe Parkinsonian conditions, including tics, rigidity, akinesia, and other problems. In some cases, it rendered them unable to move at all most of the time. Many of these people had to be institutionalized, and there they remained, locked inside themselves for decades. In 1966, Dr. Oliver Sacks began working at Mount Carmel, which housed the largest group of living post-encephalitic patients in the United States. While they were under his care, a new drug for treating Parkinson's disease called L-DOPA was released. It was hailed as a miracle drug, allowing people with this crippling disease to do all kinds of things they had previously been barred from. L-DOPA is a precursor of the brain chemical dopamine, which is lacking in people with Parkinson's. Although post-encephalitics were often much more profoundly disabled, the cause was the same. Their brains produced inadequate levels of dopamine. So Dr. Sacks got approval to test his patients on L-DOPA in the hopes that it would bring them to life. Sacks wrote of the trials in his groundbreaking 1972 book, Awakenings. He relates a number of case histories, but here we'll look at just one, named Leonard L. Leonard was the first patient put on L-DOPA. Before the treatment, Sacks wrote that Leonard was, in his 46th year, completely speechless and completely without voluntary motion, except for minute movements of the right hand. With these, he could spell out messages on a small letterboard. This had been his only form of communication for 15 years. Despite Leonard's incapacity, he was an intellectual heavyweight, serving as the hospital's librarian and reading constantly, though the pages had to be turned for him. Pent up inside was a bright, creative man. When asked how it felt to be in his condition, Leonard answered that there was an absence, a terrible isolation and coldness and shrinking, much more than you can possibly imagine, Dr. Sacks, much more than anybody who isn't this way can possibly imagine, a bottomless darkness and unreality. On L-DOPA, Leonard came almost magically to life. He could walk and talk and do everything that you or I can do, if not more. But all was not perfect. From the start, Leonard was overly energetic, what Sacks described as having too muchness. At first, Leonard's ideas bordered on the grandiose, but were largely benign in nature. In this clip from the 1990 adaptation of Awakenings, Leonard wakes Dr. Sachs up in the middle of the night to explain his plan for the rest of the world.
Read the newspaper. What's it say? All bad. It's all bad. People have forgotten what life is all about. They've forgotten what it is to be alive. They need to be reminded. They need to be reminded about what they have and what they can lose. And what I feel is the joy of life, the gift of life, the freedom of life, the wonderment of life.
Leonard was incredibly productive in this manic stage, typing a 50,000-word autobiography in 3 weeks. But he was clearly headed downhill. He would read so fast that he couldn't catch the meaning of anything he read, and he was exhibiting a series of tics, tremors, and other physical problems. Leonard's biggest mistake, though, was his demand for more freedom. He wanted to visit the nearby city on his own, and when he suggested that a brothel be set up at the hospital to serve as a sexual outlet for the able patients, he was thrown into an isolation ward. Now, this might sound distasteful, but as Sachs points out in his book, sex is a normal human activity that was off limits to patients at the institution, and that was punished whenever it was attempted. Leonard, like Charlie, just wanted a normal life. A deep psychosis set in. Leonard began hallucinating, and, perhaps worse, was having major Parkinsonian crises that could not be helped, no matter how his dosage of L-Dopa was changed. After multiple trials, he was finally taken off the medication and returned to his near catatonic state. When it was all over, Leonard, much like Charlie, had lost his abilities, but gained a new perspective. "Now I accept the whole situation," he said. "It was wonderful, terrible, dramatic and comic. It is finally sad, and that's all there is to it. I've learned a great deal in the last 3 years. I've broken through barriers which I had all my life. And now I'll stay myself, and you can keep your L-Dopa." Now, I should note that not everyone who was awakened by L-Dopa had as tragic an experience as Leonard. A few post-encephalitic patients were able to stay on the drug with significant benefits, although every one of them experienced some sort of side effects, and none were ever able to get back to the trouble-free state of their first days on L-Dopa. Reality, unlike fiction, is always more nuanced in the way it unfolds. But in a more fundamental way, the stories of Charlie and Leonard display a common desire and a common trajectory. Two men, cut off from society, find through science what they think is a way out. They both overshoot their mark and come crashing back down without ever having attained the one thing they sought, to be normal. Yet I think they were normal. We all, to some extent, share these same desires. And while our own trajectory from childhood to adulthood to the infirmity of old age may be along a gentler slope, it is not essentially any different from theirs.